A new study strongly links opposition to rising diversity within the United States with support for Donald Trump in last year's election. Now, what we have here is an academic study where several thousand individuals were asked a number of questions about what they think is going to happen as more diversity enters into different parts of American life in terms of society, what effect it'll have on business and the culture of America. And using the answers to that, they constructed a scale on how positively or negatively you view rising diversity inside of this country. And they found some really interesting results when you map that on recent political events. First, let's just look at how a couple of different groups differ on this measure. There you're seeing at the top the different party identifications. As you move to the left, people have a more positive view of diversity and more negative as you move to the right. There you see that Democrats more positive than Republicans, with independents right in the middle. Higher levels of education associated with a more positive view, although it's subtle, of rising diversity, and small differences between racial groups as well, with whites being the most likely to have a negative view of diversity. So that's kind of interesting, but that's not the most interesting thing. Let's bring up this next chart. So what you're gonna have here, and I understand it's a little bit complicated, but you're looking at the chance on the blue line that somebody who voted for Obama would then go on to vote for Donald Trump. And what you have is, as you go on the left, it's more positive view of diversity. It gets more and more negative as you go to the right. And also as you go to the right, the odds that an Obama voter would switch over to Trump based on how they view rising diversity has a massive effect on their likelihood of voting for Donald Trump, rising from almost a 0% chance to up to 0.5. It's 50% chance in that particular case. Now, the raw number of voters that this affects is small. There weren't a lot of people that could possibly be affected, but we are talking about a couple percentage points of the entire electorate. And bring up the graphic one more time, that same one, because you're gonna see that it's not just the Obama to Trump, the probably liberals or Democrats at the very least. You also have Romney voters. What's the likelihood that they'll go for Clinton or a third party rather than for Trump? Well, if they have very positive views of diversity, there's almost a little bit more than a 30% chance that they will defect from the Republican nominee to Clinton or a third party. As they get more and more negative of rising diversity, that goes down to basically nothing. And what you might say at this point is, well, this doesn't really seem all that surprising. All you're saying is that Republicans view things one way, conservatives view things one way, and liberals view things a different way. It's the classic difference between Democratic voters and Republican voters, but that's not actually the case. This is something ahistoric. If you bring up this next chart, you're going to see the effect on Trump voters. That's the red line versus the other two recent Republican nominees. Now there is, for Romney voters and for McCain voters, there is a small effect in likelihood of supporting the candidate based on your view of diversity, but it is far and away a stronger effect for Donald Trump. Those who do not want the country to be more diverse are far stronger in their support of Donald Trump over and above how they previously have viewed Republican nominees.
And look, that's not surprising either, but yet a lot of people deny it. But the reason it's not surprising is because Trump ran the campaign based on that. He said, we're gonna do a total and complete shutdown of Muslims, as one example. He said, we're gonna build a wall. It's gonna be a beautiful, big wall. We're gonna keep out the criminals and the rapists who are the Latinos. He questioned Barack Obama's citizenship, basically categorizing him as an other. He's done that for a long, long time. So if those are the things that you emphasize, you'll attract voters who don't like diversity, who are opposed to diversity. Yeah. So that's why you'll have that Trump line that is much more stark than the McCain and Romney line, which I guess in some ways is charitable to Republican voters because the Trump voters dislike diversity more than a regular Romney-McCain voter, or
it's
regular
a bigger
Republican
factor on their
voter.
vote, basically.
Yes, it's a bigger factor. It's significantly
understand,
bigger factor.
It's small text there, but they're controlling for all sorts of things: income, socioeconomic status, even views on immigration, for instance. This is not sort of a generalized thing about race. They control for that. This is specifically about the change in American culture and business that will come about as a result of increased diversity.
Okay, so I have some questions about the methodology of this study, and this is probably gonna get me in trouble, but that's okay. First of all, I do wanna note that there have been other studies that have come out that have found very different results. So there was, 538 has written extensively about how surges in Trump support do correlate to where median income has declined over the years, which does suggest an economic reason behind him gaining support where he did. There was a study by a British economic research firm that again showed poorer areas were more likely to flip to Trump compared to Obama in 2012. So bearing that in mind, I do think there are elements of truth to this research. The question I always have is if you dig down a little deeper, so look at the questions that were posed to people in the polling. One of them is, like, people had to rate whether or not they agree with the statement. The statement is a bigger, more diverse workforce will lead to more economic growth. Well, for certain people in certain regions, the answer to that would be no. I mean, they don't necessarily stand to benefit from a bigger, more diverse workforce, and economic growth won't be what they experience as a result of that. So to take that to mean that they necessarily are motivated by racial anxiety, I think is a bit of a leap. Now, that being said, obviously racial anxiety plays a role here. That's undeniable. You laid out some of the reasons, the Muslim ban, et cetera. But what I worry about this study and sort of the memes that have developed around this idea that racial anxiety is more determinative of what happened than economic anxiety is, it's sort of self-exculpatory in a way. So if you deny that Trump's slightly unorthodox economic messaging had any impact whatsoever, meaning on trade, meaning on entitlements, I think you miss why he won. I mean, he did win because he was able to speak more directly to the lower rung of the socioeconomic stratum in the Republican Party.
I don't know why. I don't think that you need to worry about it. I mean, it's not about whether we choose to take the blame for something. We look at the data and we see what it says. And if it isn't showing that, then we can choose to sort of politically martyr ourselves. But we should, if we learn the wrong lesson from an election, then we can continue to lose elections. If academic studies continue to show one thing, even if commentators or pundits or whatever feel like that's the wrong lesson to learn, we can't deny the numbers. And in terms of your question about the methodology, it's a very good question. And these sorts of measures of various sorts of attitudes are a big topic of debate inside of academic disciplines. There's whole sections of political science that specifically are about designing these. So it's not about whether they're right that diversity would be a bad thing. Because remember, they're also controlling for socioeconomic status, whether you live in a rural or non-rural area. It's about whether or not that is a predictor of your behavior.
Right. I just question whether these particular questions are the best way to gauge someone's attitudes about the utility of diversity. So another example is, there's a question here, there will not be enough jobs for everybody. That's what people were supposed to respond to. And that may well be, again, true for their particular situation. If they're in Western Pennsylvania or parts of Michigan or wherever they might be, that would be accurate. And the idea that you're gonna extrapolate from that they are therefore anxious about diversity, to me, it just seems like a bit of a stretch. I would want to see this replicated in further studies, and I agree that the data is important. This particular inquiry, to me, raises a lot of questions.
Well, but again, so that was a good second question there, but it's not about whether they're right to be anxious about diversity. In your case, they're saying they potentially should be in some areas, but they are. And that's what this is intended to measure, whether they're anxious about rising diversity. Not about whether they're morally wrong to be anxious about diversity.
But they're anxious about diversity only insofar as it lessens their economic prospects. So they're not anxious about diversity as such. They're anxious about it because the effect of that more diverse workforce will mean they'll be left behind. So when the headline takeaway is that they're anxious about diversity and that correlates with support for Trump, I think you're missing the fundamental reason why somebody might respond in the affirmative to one of these questions.
Well, but also, so the effect on businesses, they have to have something like this because they want to get to the economic component of diversity. But that's why they ask 4 or 5 different questions. There's cultural, social, and all of that. And generally, you find incredibly high overlaps in answers to these various questions. People don't often tend to answer that they are very concerned about one and not concerned about another. They tend to vote, to speak in patterns. But very good concerns, and that's why no academic study can go on its own. This is gonna need to be followed up.
And here's the conclusion that they reach if you look at the synopsis that was written as to the data. We find little evidence to support the idea that concerns about trade deals or a rigged system contributed significantly to a Trump victory. So to me, if that's the takeaway here, then that's the wrong lesson learned.
Yeah, on that I most agree with you.
Well, but they're specifically asking people about that and seeing what effect it had on their vote. They're showing that it didn't influence their vote.
But that's such an amorphous notion, right? People express their discontent with the rigged system in a multitude of ways.
So I think that's specifically the wrong conclusion. It doesn't invalidate the study. Now, obviously I'm gonna have to adjudicate here. And I'm actually gonna agree with both of you guys, and I'm not doing that to be PC. Let me explain why I'm saying both.
Should we sing Kumbaya?
So if some of these questions are not great because they can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. I almost wish they had just asked the first one, which is, Americans will learn more from one another and be enriched by exposure to many different cultures, right? If they just asked that yes or no, people who said, nah, they were not gonna be enriched by any other goddamn cultures, then you'd have a good sense of, wait, is this about diversity and racial issues, or is it about economic issues? The other ones are really kind of mixed in between race and economy. It is possible that you'll think if there's more diversity, that's a great thing, but there'll be less jobs. That is possible that you would think that, right? And I understand what you're saying, John. Either way, they're testing what they think about
diversity.
Fears about diversity, right? I get that, but and remember, keep in mind that these are some Obama voters. So like, how racist could they be if they voted for the black guy? Now the answer is still pretty racist, right? It's entirely possible. But at the same time, you can't just conclude it's the racism, because if they were that racist, they wouldn't have voted for Obama in the first place.
Well, and they're not saying that it was just the racism.
No, of course they're not. And so
they're saying it could theoretically shift a couple of percentage points, which in an election that was won by less than 100,000 votes spread across 3 states, that could theoretically explain the difference.
Right. So which then leads me to the obvious conclusion, which I think we all agree with, which is it was both. It was both.
Yes.
And so that's why I've always said that Hillary Clinton's most accurate comment is the one she got the most hate for, which is the basket of deplorables comment. Everybody criticized, oh man, that was impolitic. No, but half the Trump voters are guys who don't like the other guys, okay? And half were super pissed about the economy. So when you say the stat, Michael, about Obama voters were more likely to switch in areas where they don't have income growth, definitely, that's the economic side. That's the economic side we kept talking about on the Young Turks. You covered even before you were here. We were like, pay attention to that. That's super real, and that doesn't have anything to do with the race. So it's a combination of all those factors for different people.
Yeah, so it's definitely a confluence, and I think basically everybody would concede that it's a confluence of factors. But this study, I mean, that one of the conclusions drawn is that economic anxiety really was not a factor. I mean, that's what they write here. I mean, I'll read it again. We find little evidence to support the idea that concerns about trade deals or a rigged system contributed significantly to a Trump victory.
No, that is an improper conclusion from their own study.
Well, no, we talked about one section of the study. They also, for instance, when they say that they don't believe that trade policy had an effect, they also asked them a slate of questions about what they think about trade, and they found that those answers did not predict support for Donald Trump. They asked them questions about whether the system is rigged, whether it's set up to support powerful interests, and they found, well, let's go to that actually. Questions about whether the political system benefits wealthy elites predicted vote choice, but in the wrong direction. People who agreed that the system benefited powerful elites were more likely to reject Trump. And so that's not the same questions that we talked about in the earlier part, but that's what they found.
Yeah, so there you have, and I get, guys, that there's a lot of different factors involved here because that's the real world, right?
The real world's complicated.
Yes, that's right. And so there you have a mix of what could be, and obviously we're all speculating to some degree based on the data presented, propaganda mixed in with how your gut feelings. Here's what I mean by that. So the Republicans for a long time have been doing propaganda that the elites are perfectly good people, right? Hey, corporations are human beings, my friend, right? As Mitt Romney famously said. And hey, no, that's just liberal crap talk about the elites. Now, on the other hand, Trump did hit the elites in this election, so it's a little bit mixed messages. But the bottom line is, when your wages have not gone up and you're not doing well, you're mad, right? So somebody could come in and take advantage of that, of your gut instinct that things are going wrong, even if marketing got you to believe, no, the elites are fine, the big business loves me. That's what I've been told my whole life, but God damn it, I'm mad. So it could still be that they're voting based on their madness, the fact that they're mad, but when asked that specific question, go, no, yeah, I'm pro-elites, right?
And I think the issue here might be that this study is based on polling, and the questions are relatively complicated and multi-layered. So, not everybody thinks about their economic anxiety in terms that are easily relatable to polling questions, which But then if you go look at the studies that were conducted in the aftermath of the election, those didn't rely on polling data. Those relied on median household income declining or rising, wages declining or rising. So you didn't need to rely on people expressing their discontent in any particular way to draw the conclusion that poorer counties were more likely to flip from Obama to Trump.
But the problem with that also then is if you're simply looking at county level data, you're not running complicated regressions where you can account for other factors. And so that means that if you look at the county, you can attempt to say that this is the explanation for it, but you have dozens or potentially hundreds of variables that could be influencing the outcome. Whereas if you do the polling data, you have information about the person's income, you have information about their race, you have their age, all of these things. You can then control for those things and try to figure out the individual factors that are actually influencing the outcome.
Yeah, of course you'd want to do a regression analysis as a regressive.
The regressive left.
That's going to be a meme later today.
The regressive left. At it again.
Their regressive analyses.
Okay.
Yeah. Look. It's complicated. This is one study. There will be many, but I do think everybody. So I agree with you. I think that there are many lessons we should draw from this election, and I am automatically suspicious of anyone who tries to say that there's one, because that does not sound like an accurate reflection of reality to me. That sounds like someone trying to push a narrative. And so it might be that you take the conclusions at the end of this article and say, well, come on, like you have some data, but you're trying to draw way too broad of a conclusion there. And you're probably right. That's probably true of almost every academic study. But we should care about the data. This is just one little bit, but just because it doesn't fit into a narrative doesn't necessarily mean that there's nothing to learn from it.
That I agree with. We have regressed into agreement.
You know who's going to stop Trump, stop the establishment, stop the corruption? You are. You help us hire new investigative reporters, and we will unleash it on them. tytnetwork.com/go. Let's build the best journalism team in America.